Now, let's talk about Right to the City Brisbane as an organisation. It's really only emerged in the last kind of 18 months or so, although it does have those strong links to precursor projects, as I mentioned, Brisbane Free University, Conspiracy, which was a public art project that roves around Brisbane, other kind of broad Brisbane lefty, greeny scenes, but also importantly, the campaign and election of Councillor Jonathan Sri, who is the first Greens councillor elected to Brisbane City Council. He's very much on his own in there, but he is, a lot of us met each other, a lot of the people who then became the founders of Right to the City Brisbane found each other through Jono's campaign. It remains a loose collective that's non-hierarchical. Leaders and groups of leaders tend to form around specific projects and issues. So rather than Right to the City Brisbane having a kind of strict organisational structure or a set of leaders, it's more there's a person who's really interested in tactical urbanism and they'll form a little group that wants to go do some guerrilla gardening and they'll take on that leadership role for that time. Again, really strong emphasis on relationships, and often planning and action feels at least as much like spending time with mates as it does planning some kind of activist event. And part of this is because Right to the City Brisbane is attempting to create a kind of everyday spatial politics that counteracts what Mark Fisher described, who we visited at the start of the presentation, as the slow cancellation of the future, which we've now experienced. So under the weight of the depressing moment that we find ourselves in, this group is trying to give a sense of hope to one another through these relationships and through the actions we take. So it is in attempting to kind of imagine a better and radically different future, trying to locate and produce for each other these points of light through the curtain that can revive some possibility and hope. But Right to the City Brisbane reflects the spatialisation of radical politics in Brisbane, which is interesting. It emerged from folk trying to find a way to link the relationship between their material and social conditions and spatial conditions, which, you know, if you're a geographer or planner, is like really cool to see that just kind of happen in the wild. As well as find ways to articulate a collective claim for justice rather than individual claims for justice. And again, as I mentioned earlier, so we saw Right to the City Brisbane really early on make an explicit link between the way that urban space is produced and the way that our material conditions in cities are produced, which means that it offers the possibility that if we transform the process of producing urban space, then we can transform our material conditions in the city. In changing the city, we change ourselves. There's three quick tenets of Right to the City Brisbane that I will talk about quickly that have kind of structured their actions to date. The first is prefigurative politics, the second is undisciplined urbanism, and the third is constituting a public. So first, prefigurative politics, points to anyone who gets the visual pun. Thank you. So central to the idea of prefigurative politics is the idea that new possibilities, new institutions, new organisations, new ways of living can be built from the systems we currently find ourselves in. So the common phrase is building a new world in the shell of the old. So rather than waiting for a revolutionary moment, as we often see in kind of radical left politics, it's not about waiting for that perfect moment of revolutionary change. It rejects that model altogether. Instead, prefigurative politics argues that we grow transformative change in the cracks of the present, as imperfect, constrained as that might be, and as imperfect and constrained as our actions might be in that present. It means that we can grow and experiment with and experience different ways of relating to each other in the here and now, which creates space for new possibilities. So rather than waiting for a perfect moment of revolution to implement your glorious utopia, it is about, through everyday practices, through everyday relationships, trying to start to build that utopia for each other in the here and now, even if it's ephemeral, especially when it's ephemeral, even if it's only in really small, tiny ways. Prefigurative politics also argues that the effects of neoliberalism, our alienation and precarity, climate change and ecological disasters and economic instability, can also be understood as opportunities to open up fissures which can create better modes of being. So it's the idea that there are these cracks in the concrete of neoliberalism. There is not that monorealism that has been sold to us, I suppose, that there are these cracks, and in these cracks we can build something. It also rejects utopian modes of thinking, refuses to engage in like a romantic vision of what the future can be like based on what's happened before, or to position our hopes for the future as something that lies in front of us. It's about enacting a better world in the here and now, which in some ways, for those of you kind of familiar with this space, it resonates a little bit with some of the anti-futurism stuff that we see in queer theory, and resonates with multinaturalist ontologies, where it's about not waiting for a future, not hinging our hopes on a future, because that future might never come. So prefigurative politics rejects hierarchy, rejects teleological modes of revolution, so rejects an idea that revolution is going to happen in a particular way or look a particular way or indeed happen at all. And so prefigurative politics often involves refusing to produce a clear model of what it is that we're aiming for. So it's not about saying, this is what a just city will look like specifically. This is our plan for a just city. Here's our 10-point strategy. Instead, prefigurative politics is an approach to organising that seeks to make other kinds of futures possible again, to wrest our future back from the futurelessness of capitalist realism. It is to poke holes through the curtain, to shine some lights on through so that we can start to see other ways of being. Anna Carlson, one of the founders of Brisbane Free University and someone who's really heavily involved in this project, says that we've been sold this idea that capitalism has consumed the horizon. So part of our goal under prefigurative politics, in fact, the first goal, is not to struggle to reach some horizon, but actually simply just to find one again. Simon Springer, who's an anarchist geographer who writes a lot about prefigurative politics, says that our goal is not a means to an end, but our goal is to future means. We struggle now so we can struggle again better. Right to the City of Brisbane has also been marked by undisciplined urbanism. So what we've seen is this kind of radical opening up of town planning, using tactical urbanism as a kind of broad strategy. So for those of you who aren't familiar with tactical urbanism, really quickly, basically it's making plans without the usual preponderance of planning, as Nabil Hamdi said. But it's this idea that we saw two new kinds of urbanism emerge in the 21st century. One of them was this like macro, massive scale urbanism of the mega development, the mega projects, the global city, really struggling to find a term that is not phallic, but you know what I mean, right? Like these big projects that are deemed to mark a city as being part of this new century. But we've also seen, obviously relatedly, the emergence of micro-urbanisms in response to the kind of very undemocratic way of producing cities that those mega developments reflect, because they are, often from global capital, they're often not situated locally, they often involve no local sense of context. So instead we're seeing these micro-urbanisms emerge, and and tactical urbanism is one such approach. So tactical urbanism is really strongly linked to kind of DIY culture, it's linked to street art, activist and anarchist culture, as we saw in our friendly neighbourhood pothole fixes from the first slide, and also for movements for collaborative planning and collaborative design. Tactical urbanism is usually small scale and really quick. It's usually low cost and usually temporary or ephemeral, although it might be aiming to produce a kind of long-term change. It's experimental, it's designed to be fumble and fail friendly, so just you wonder if something's going to make a city better, try it out super cheaply, super quickly. Doesn't work, tear it down, that's fine, fail quickly. It also may or may not be sanctioned. So tactical urbanism is often, part of what it does, it does have this antagonistic, often playful, but like a playfully antagonistic relationship with the systems that police urban space. So it might be something like, one I saw recently was, there'd been a big movement to protect a bike lane. Government refused to protect a bike lane. This was in the States. So someone just bought a whole heap of toilet plungers and went and just like marked out the bike lane, a separated bike lane with toilet plungers. Illegal, yes, but playful, quick, not doing damage really, and can show a different way that city could be, can reconfigure the space, can open up our imaginary about what that space might look like. And so this has been a key tactic of Right to the City of Brisbane. This has been one of the key ways that it has started to organise its politics, it's started to do that prefigurative approach. It's just to create, even if it's only ephemeral, different kinds of spaces in cities that are democratic, that are collaboratively produced, that are decommodified, and that are welcoming and accessible. This is a picture from one of our guerrilla gardening projects. This was a pretty antagonistic one because this is actually private land that had been neglected. It's a lot that had been, huge amounts of trash on it, and like dangerous trash, like syringes and things. There'd been lots of complaints by neighbours to the council, to the owner, to try and clear it up. The development application for this lot was in the court, so nothing can happen and nothing will happen for a long time. There's certainly nothing about to happen there in the near future. So a local resident who was also a member of Right to the City of Brisbane was like, I'm just going to clean it up. Who wants to help me clean up this lot and make it safe? We can put some trees in, maybe make the site usable until the time that a development application goes through on the site. What's just out of frame is this beautiful big hoop pine that is causing lots of issues with the design for the site. This was after our first day, digging and cleaning and planting. There was a lot more work done. That story has a tragic ending, which I won't go into just now. But again, this is antagonistic. When people came past, they were like, oh, it's so great to see the developer finally cleaning up, or it's so great to see council finally cleaning up this lot. And the group would just be like, no, it's just us. We're just local residents. We're just pitching in. I'm like, isn't that trespassing? Yep, it's trespassing. But hey, like, we just think it needs to happen, so we're doing it. And often then neighbours would come down and get involved as well. Or like bring watermelon and pineapple and beer and coffee. Like, it was an example of that point of light through the curtain, right? It was just this fissure where all of a sudden the logic of what people thought was how you could behave was disrupted. All of a sudden it was like, actually, you know what? We've just got a group of us together, going to put in a few hours, going to see what we can do. People are shocked, amazed. All of a sudden a way of relating to each other is possible that didn't really seem possible before. The other key part of Right to the City of Brisbane is constituting a public. So as I talked about at the top of the presentation, there is this sense that we have lost a sense of being a part of each other, right? We tend to think about ourselves as individuals. But if we're going to issue a collective cry, a collective demand, as Right to the City is, then we have to constitute a collective first. We cannot, or, in exercising the demands, so create a collective. So cities are these sites where we can perhaps start to form community in new ways. And a big part of Right to the City of Brisbane has been, in adopting this relational mode of organising, really trying to do that work of rebuilding community and a kind of enmeshedness that many of us have never had and have had a hole in our hearts, have wanted, have desired. It's a kind of model, I think, that says that comrades aren't enough, that you need care. Care is necessary. This is a group that is, in flawed, always imperfect ways, trying to adopt this ethic of care to one another, as well as to the city, as well as to its broader community. And again, we're seeing care and love and kindness positioned as integral to resistance, and as a kind of resistance in and of themselves. So alongside tactical urbanism, there's also been an emphasis on events that can build relationships, both within and beyond the group. So the rally pictured here, which in many ways looks like a pretty typical kind of rally, this was organised by Right to the City of Brisbane alongside Councillor Jonathan Sree, outside of a very unpopular development in West End. But this march and rally, and we were blocking off the entry, and the result was that construction was shut down for the day on the site. But it started with a community breakfast in a local park, where a bunch of volunteers had a bunch of food. We all just pitched in and cooked breakfast for quite a few people. Food is actually a really common thing. We've had other events where part of what we've done is feed each other and others. And there's also often dancing and music and poetry and laughter. And this is a core part of Right to the City of Brisbane, the culture that it's trying to build. And again, we're seeing this is what we love about cities, right? The opportunity for community, for encounter, for joy, for art, for dancing, for music, and for just actually conviviality, for enjoying each other. And so rather than trying to fight abstractly for a city sometime in the future when that might happen, our struggle also needs to embody those things. That again is that approach of prefigurative politics. So quickly, some of the examples, and this one, our first street party called Break the Boundary. It was fantastic. We did not get permits. We had bands play. We had dancing in the street. It was completely fantastic and wonderful. We've had, this one in the middle here was from a 24-hour day of occupation against the Queen's Wharf mega casino happening in the heart of Brisbane. It's about 10% of the Brisbane CBD, which is like horrifying that that's what's happening there. But actually a lot of people had no idea it was happening. So Right to the City of Brisbane helped organise a bunch of community forums about what was happening, and then we had this 24-hour occupation of the park, which again, we had a low rollers dinner and fed a couple hundred people soup.